Dreaming.
Okay. Well, let's get started. This is the April 14th meeting of the Comprehensive Rezoning Update Task Force. So welcome everyone, and we'll start with a roll call. If you'd like to put your cameras on, we'll be able to see each other, but just please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Okay. Al Nickerson? Bill Norris?
I'm here.
Okay. And I can see Mr. Sutton.
Yeah.
Brian Greenwood.
Here.
Buck Nickerson.
Madam Chair, this is Bill Mackey. Just want to report that Al Nickerson is here.
Okay, thank you. Vicky Shidwani. Cindy Genther. Jim
Ms.
Rich.
Ginther,
Oh, sorry.
I would say Ms. Ginther reached out to me and she's unable to make this meeting and sends her apologies.
Thank you. Jim Rich.
Madam Chair, Mr. Rich is withdrawn from the group.
Okay. Jim Saunders. I see Joe Hickman. And I did see Pat Langenfelder. Pat, you're still here, correct?
I'm still here.
Thank you. Paul Ruge.
I'm here.
Sam Shogi. And Tom Mason. Okay, it looks like we have a very small group this evening. So we'll start with the approval of the summary from the March 31 meeting. Are there any edits or additions?
Madam Chair, this is Bill Mackey. I'm aware there's some spelling errors that have been repaired. Thank you.
Okay, any other edits or additions? Okay, hearing no others. Setting aside the spelling errors, all those in favor to accept the meeting, the minutes as submitted, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, so we will submit the meeting minutes as submitted. Quick review of our purpose and ground rules. Purpose is to preserve the best of Kent County while supporting opportunities for expanding into new economies, yet innovative and thoughtful changes to the county's zoning regulations that simplify process and add new uses. We're encouraged to discuss openly and freely, recognizing there's no right or wrong inputs. And we will start with old business. Mr. Mackey, is there any old business?
Madam Chair, I don't have any old business. This is an opportunity if anyone on the task force wants to make a comment or bring up one of the items from the last meeting that they may do so.
Would anyone like to comment? Okay. Hearing no old business, let's move on to new business. Start with a review of the members' requests for text changes to the zoning code. So Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The way I had envisioned this is that the members who suggested different changes can speak to them. Carla has prepared some comments and also prepared the references in the agenda so that some of the questions that might come up can be explained. So our first comment is reviewing the setbacks for agricultural structures. And I know we did some research on the staff team looking at other counties. I wonder maybe Carla could give us a brief overview. No. Okay. My apologies.
I can talk about Kent County.
Okay. Yes, that's perfectly fine.
So I think we gave you a list of a lot of the references in the agricultural zoning district that deal with setbacks for agricultural strucures. There is one in particular, I think, was the waste management structures that has generated a lot of discussion. It was a text amendment that was done in response to people wanting to locate best management practices by putting waste structures on their facilities, their farms, to take poultry litter. And we were regulating them the same way that we regulate waste management structures when people have poultry houses. And that has led to some issues with differences between the state laws where you can put poultry litter directly on your property, on the ground, I believe 100 feet from the road. And if you actually want to put up a structure to store the material before you spread it, we are requiring a 600-foot setback. As you can see, we have a lot of other setbacks based on whether it's a poultry house, it's a private stable, commercial stable, a dairy. There are different accessory farm building setbacks for the housing of animals where it's not a stable. And so I think the desire is to try to come up with a simpler format for regulating ag structures. And I don't know if Mr. Mason has anything he'd like to add, because I believe this was something that he wanted us to address. And I believe Mr. Mackey has looked at Cecil County and Queen Anne's County.
Yeah, Bill, do you want to comment on the two other counties?
Yes, I can do that. I don't have the research in front of me, but in reaching out to those two counties, both of their sets of regulations for animal-related husbandry setbacks are much simpler. There's only one or two standards, and often they relate to distance from a residential use. So that would be the summary, and I'm happy to provide that as follow-up material to the task force.
Well, I kind of went through the code here, and it's kind of really confusing.
I don't think you're on.
Well,
I can't hear you.
well, I don't know what, maybe I am muted, I don't think so.
It's not muted.
Can you hear me now? You hear me? I can hear you right here.
Kim, can you hear Tom when he's talking? Kim?
I cannot hear Tom.
Shh.
Let me take, can you hear me now? I see it's on, but I don't know what, I don't know what else, I'm not muted.
We're going to try a different headset.
Maybe that was.
Is that better?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. Malfunctioning equipment. um, when I kind of went through this and looked at some of these, it's really confusing in some ways. And I think I've got. I've got 2A here. If you have 2 acres for a private stable, you can have a structure for housing, feeding of animals, 100 feet. Then it'll say down in a commercial, you'll have a structure for the keeping or feeding of animals and waste management structures, a minimum 400 feet. And then accessory farm buildings, which are all structures for the keeping of animals, they could be a minimum of 100 feet. So there's a lot of variation here, and where the 600 feet came from, except, it was changed back in October of 2017. I just think we need to somewhere come up with a distance that's kind of the same for everything. I just personally think 600 feet's too far. If you take a farm that, you can put a 600-foot building in the middle of your field, and then you need a road to get to it. Depending on your farm, you might be able to put it beside an existing road. Not all farmers could do that, which then makes impervious surface, takes ground out of production. And meanwhile, we can pile a chicken litter. I believe MDA says 125 feet from the road. But if you put a roof over it, then King County says it needs to be 600 feet. So I don't know that. I just don't understand why we need 600 feet when the state says 125. I just think it's too much. If you have an animal, why do you have to be 600 feet from a property line? Whereas you don't have to be in some cases. If it's an accessory farm building, like I said, it can be 100 feet. Or if you have 2 acres, it's something different. If the lot's 20 acres, then you can be 400 feet. There needs to be some clarification there, and I think we need to come up with a distance that's reasonable.
Can I say something?
Yeah, I'm finished for the moment.
I don't disagree that there's all different rules here and different distances. I thought that the poultry houses was 600 feet and manure storage structures are 600 foot. Is that correct? All right, I'm watching Carla's head. Okay. As regard to the 100 foot with the private stable, well, that was only a one or two animals. A feedlot or a confinement dairy, that's a special exception. And I do not know the standard for the distance. I couldn't figure that out when I was reading through there. But in our case, on our farm, it's a special exception. And we had a 600 foot setback when we moved here. So, but I do agree with you, Tom. I think this could be revisited or looked at and try to make it a little more simple, but I wouldn't want to say that a large poultry house, a large hog farm, a large dairy could only be 100 feet from the line. That seems a little close to me when you have a large number of animals. You're talking about a small barn with fewer animals. Yeah, I'll make that closer, but I
Well,
don't disagree.
I don't think it should be 100 feet either. I mentioned 200 feet. I mean, somewhere I think we need to have a meeting of the minds and come up with something. But I think 600 feet is way too much. I don't know why the state allows 125 feet.
Isn't that for a temporary?
Well, what's temporary? I mean, a
Well,
lot of you know as well as I do. I mean, farmers, we can stack that manure in November and spread it in April, so half the year it's there. I mean, it's not going to be there through the summer because you're going to plant a crop there. But I don't know. I don't know what the difference is between stacking it in a field with a roof or without a roof. I think it's always better to have it covered. I just think it's a point of discussion. And that's what this group is here for. But somewhere in her code, we've got to come to some kind of because there's all these different feet, and I don't think anyone knows what it really should. I mean, an accessory farm building, which you can keep animals in, that only has to be a minimum of 100 feet. So, and then again, a stable. What is a stable? What's the definition of a stable? My father-in-law, he always said he went to the stable to milk cows. Now, someone today, they're probably, oh, that's stable, that's a horse. Well, yeah, it is. Like I say, it's a matter of discussion, and I just think, personally, I think we need to come up with something that's more workable. And my contention is it shouldn't be 600 feet. I don't know what it should be, but that's sort of what I think we want to try to get some guidance from this task group what it should be.
Tom, I disagree with some points. I think obviously there's a definition for stable somewhere, but the scope and scale of these are different. And I think for primary ones are feedlot, poultry houses, and waste management structures.
Well, what's a feedlot? I mean, what's the definition? I'll tell you, that's where you feed. What our code says, that's cattle, horses. I don't know anybody has a feedlot for horses, but sheep, goats, and swine. That's a feedlot in King County. I don't know anybody has a feedlot for even anywhere.
I think poultry houses, feedlots, large animals your size, scale farms, and waste management structures should be more than 200 feet back from property lines because neighbors.
Mr. Hickman,
Too, and those being
we can't hear you.
All right. Yeah, I can't hear anything. The only one I could hear was Tom Mason.
Joe speaking? Yeah, I didn't hear Joe.
He's not muted.
Carla, are we waiting for someone else to speak?
We're trying to figure out
What's happening with Joe?
Got it, okay.
He's trying to figure out what's happening to Joe. Come on.
You're on.
You're
Okay.
on now.
All right.
I can hear you now, I think.
Okay. I can hear myself twice.
Maybe that was me because I wasn't muted.
Nah. Anyway, I feel there's a difference between size and scale of the operations in this.
Can other people hear? Everyone else
Yes.
hear Joe?
Loud and clear.
And, particularly waste management
Everyone else
structures, poultry houses, and feedlots, confinement area, and we could look at the definition. I assume we have definitions, but that the as a to allow the continue the good relationship we have farmers have with property owners here is to allow it to set waste management storage structures, because no farmer builds one next to his house, and they don't put poultry houses next to their houses. They put them where they want, but I think it's a showing of respect for other landowners, and I think that there's a reason there are different definitions is for the size and scale of these units. I think a large waste management structure within 200 feet of a residence, and this says housing developments, incorporated villages, towns, villages. It doesn't say about the poor soul's got 2 acres there he's owned for family's owned for 100 years, and then someone puts one next to them. So they deserve their property rights too.
Well, and I think we have. That's another issue in the fact of what do we do with that person who's built a home in an agriculturally zoned area? And maybe this is an education thing. They need to realize that there could be things that happen in agriculture that maybe they don't like. Would you, and we can go, and I don't know what the setbacks are for a grain setup. I would rather have a dairy farm next to me than a whole bunch of grain tanks with fans and dryers and everything else running, even for 2 months. I'd rather have a dairy farm for 12 months. I mean, that's a personal thing, but I think somewhere we have to decide and can make sure we're conveying to people. I mean, if we're going to follow our comprehensive plan that we want to be an agricultural area, an agricultural county, that there's things that people move here, buy a home, and out in there's no one around them, that there might be a combine running there at 11 o'clock at night.
We have right to farm.
Right
That's
to
not
farm.
a problem. But I'm talking about existing residences now. People that owned property before, they didn't build into it. They owned them before there was zoning even.
Well, I don't know how many of that. I don't know.
Oh, there's quite a few. Some of our smaller villages, some of our poorer communities, that's where they are.
Well, we're not going to do this near our villages and our housing developments.
There's single family residences out off the edge of Big Woods, Chesterville Forest, Georgetown, those areas.
Well,
they were built before our zoning ordinance came in.
Well, I would take Big Woods as a community, and that would have a 600-foot setback.
And it needs to be defined better than this.
Well, right. Well, that would be part of this task force job, is to find where are these communities.
But I guess I haven't seen the impact where farmers here are saying we can't farm here because we don't have a place to put manure. They're putting buildings up. We give special exceptions for them, and we have approved those because the public gets to weigh in individually there. It gives the public a chance to find out, set standards if they're under. We did Miss Gifford's small farm, got approved. We've done others. I think there's a mechanism already set up to allow it, but it does allow the community to participate. It's not by right. That's my opinion.
Well, and people should be able to participate in this. But the other thing we are doing, and we've done it, in the last 2 years, how many variances have we granted for manure structures? Someone comes in and we grant them. So why do we have this restriction in the code if there's only one I can think of that wasn't granted, and it was because of an airport, not because of anything else.
because
So
we
it's,
allowed the public to weigh in on those, and they chose. No one felt they were harmed. No
Well-
neighbors were harmed.
well, they can weigh in on this.
Well, if it's approved by right, they can.
What's that?
If it's changed to 200 feet, that's the law. Not they can't.
Right. Well, that's why we're having this
That's
discussion.
what I said. They won't have the opportunity if it's already allowed by zoning. That's my point. Right now, they can weigh in and be turned down. They can find out the planning commission says no, we're going to allow it anyway, even though because the rights of the farm owners are important too.
So what should it be?
I think that's what I mean, that's what this group's supposed to be.
Someone else is speaking. We can't hear you.
So
This is
sounds like
Pat.
maybe we're agreed that this, oh, Pat, go.
This is Pat. I would like to just point out that I agree with Joe in the respect that you can apply for a variance if the law says it has to be 600 foot back, but you can apply for a variance. And I agree with Tom. A lot of them have been agreed to, and they said, fine, go ahead and build it. But the public had an opportunity to come in there. The neighbors are all alerted. They can come and say, well, I don't want it there, or I don't care. And it's that extra step that shows that we care about our neighbors. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons that 600 foot should stay for the manure storage and the large poultry, the feedlot, and the dairy.
This bill, something, one thing we need or doing now is making farmers to be better neighbors. And some of it's by law, some is by just good farming. So on this 600 foot thing, I thought it was further back than 2007, whatever they said. But that's kept a lot of people out of trouble for getting on a bad list with the public. So I would be for just what we just recently discussed, have the restrictions there, and you would have to deal with each one as is case. And if we need to, we have a research committee or somebody who can do some deeper finds as to what standards we really want. In my opinion, the most serious thing we can do is not be a good neighbor.
Mr. Mackey, I think it's back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe our next item is discussion of the 10% rule. We had more than one member who suggested this as a topic for discussion. On the agenda, there's an example given that under this rule, if two brothers were to inherit a 198 acre farm and they decided to part ways, they're not allowed to divide the farm into two 99 acre parcels. But the best they're allowed to divide is a 19.8 acre parcel from the farm. So this topic has come up more than once, and in our research efforts, there was a request to see if other counties have this rule. We're pretty sure that this is unique to Kent County.
All right. Billy Norris here. I don't know if anybody can hear me because I'm certainly not hearing too much of what else is going on.
We can hear you, Billy.
Okay. I'm in 100% in favor of eliminating the 10% rule from the entire zoning ordinance. I think it completely limits so many options. It limits the ability of anybody to create small farms, which seem to be in very high demand here. And I just think that it shuts us down so much. And I understand if you have a large farm and you don't want to develop your farm, that's fine. I think there's other avenues to preserve that and everything else. But I think to limit people that have a farm and either financially need to sell a piece or would desire to sell a piece to a family member or a friend or anybody like that, I think it severely limits the options that people that own agricultural land in the county have. And I think that a certain percentage of the land here should have the ability to divide into larger parcels. And by that I mean not just one 19-acre parcel for a 198-acre farm. So I'm in favor of eliminating the whole 10% rule. I'm in favor of keeping the 1 to 5 or whatever it is, however the maximum amount that you can divide a farm, maybe 6 parcels. And I think that I know that back years ago, before the 10% rule, there was a lot more going on than there is now with any kind of ability to subdivide. So that's what I have to say about the 10% rule.
This is Buck Nickerson. There's a couple things I'd like to add to this. I know somebody who was on the former committee when they rewrote the zoning ordinance that we're looking at now. And I remember when this was going on, and there was, and this is hearsay, but it was firsthand, that there was mention of this 10% rule, and it was voted down in committee, just like what we're doing now. When it got to the end of their series of meetings, it was brought up again. Immediately, it was shot down, and then mysteriously, when the zoning ordinance came out, there was a 10% rule in there. Something else that I think, the last few years, last 10 years or so, we've had pretty good crops for the most part, fair prices and all that. But I can remember back in the 80s when there was a lot of drought conditions. I can remember the man I was working for, I think his overall crop was 45 bushels to the acre. And several people had to sell lots off the farm to keep from losing the farm. So this 10% rule, I think, also kind of hurts whether you want to say the equability or the backing of your land. If you have to sell off a couple lots to keep from losing the whole farm or to stay in business, sometimes that's what you have to do. And I think this 10% rule, really restricts that.
I have a question for Carla. This is Kim. Carla, can you help us? I was always under the impression that it was, I don't know how it got there, but when I joined the Planning Commission, my understanding was that the county was in some way opposed to smaller farms, and that the larger farms were the preferred. And I'm just curious, was there some kind of history there, or what was the rationale behind that 10% rule?
This is Carla. The rationale behind the 10% rule was to keep large tracts of land intact, and that the increasing prevalence of farmettes, the 20 to 30 acre tracts, was having a negative effect on the agricultural industry, that it made it harder to keep support services, because as you have smaller farms, they're farmed differently than obviously 20 acres is farmed differently than 100 acres. there was the support from the Agricultural Advisory Commission when this was done 20 years ago. But again, things may have changed. So that was the intent, was to keep the agricultural zoning district with large farms, and the rural character district was created as a way to have those farmettes. There's not as much land obviously zoned for rural character, but it does allow a density of one dwelling unit per 20 acres, and you can make those lots any size you want. I would agree with some of what some of the other statements have been, that there have been some difficulties, particularly with the farms that are under 200 acres. There's a complementary provision in the land use ordinance that says if you've got if you do a subdivision and at least all of the tracts stay over 100 acres, then the 10% rule doesn't apply. So that's where you hit this 199 or 198 acre issue. A 200 acre farm or larger can be split into large tracts, so long as everything stays over 100 acres. But it's the smaller pieces where we've had some trouble. And there could be a way to develop a compromise that could help the people that do find themselves in this 199 acre situation, but also still find a way to make sure larger tracts stay intact, if that is kind of the desire of the task force and of the ag community.
Thank you, Carla.
Can I interject something again? It's Billy Norris. I think also that you got to keep in mind that our county, if you really look at the acreage that's owned, the farm acreage and whatnot in the county, a huge amount of the farmland in the county is owned by very few members of the county and the population of the county. And also, it kind of funnels all of the income to a very small amount of people in the county. I know it's spread out to seed dealers and fertilizers and all the people that work for them, but I think the smaller farms, some smaller farms, I'm not looking to go out and develop everything, but keep in mind that the smaller farm owners, the 20 acre type people and all that, they go into our local businesses, the mill in Kingstown, they go into tractor farm, whatever it is up here, Tractor Supply. They go to Cooper John Deere, and they spend a lot of money in those areas, supporting some of our local businesses as well. And I think that you got to keep that in mind too. There's a lot of people that would love to have 2 or 3 cows, or love to have raise beef on their own, become self-sustainable. And it worries me a little bit that so much of our farmland in this county, and I would love to see the statistics, have fallen into such few people's hands, or such few families' hands. I'm sure there's people that don't want to hear that, but it doesn't spread out the wealth of the county very well. And so I think some of that has to be kept in mind too. So there's just not the opportunity. There's a ton of people. I've been in the real estate business here just about almost 40 years, and there is a ton of people that would love to buy their own little section of heaven, and there's no opportunities for it. If you don't want to subdivide your land, you don't have to subdivide your land. But I think people should have the option to subdivide their land if they want. So, and I think Buck had a wonderful, wonderful point there, that not everybody, farmers have tons of money, and sometimes they need to make a move in order to keep the family farm or keep their livelihood going, because they've had something go wrong, either natural problem or a family problem, and they need to sell something off. And so I think that the door ought to be opened up a little bit there. Thank you.
Kim, I'd like to make a comment. I think the other thing that we need to look at is to realize that agriculture has changed in Kent County. It's changed everywhere, but it has changed in Kent County over the last 40, 50 years. There's a lot of people today that um, they're not, they may not be interested in farming 1,000 acres of land. They want to put up a greenhouse and grow tomatoes. They might want to start a vineyard, and they don't want, they don't want a big mass of ground. The first thing is they can't afford it, but all they want's enough to support their agricultural industry. And I think, I mean, we kind of eliminate that in Kent County. And I think this rule kind of helps us eliminate it. At the same time, we don't know if we were to change this and eliminate the 10% rule, if we would have we don't know how many people we would have to come and want to build a greenhouse or start a vineyard or start, I mean, the imagination is whatever they can imagine that they feel they can make work. But I think we ought to have it there so a person could do that. Because, like Billy says, they're going to spend money in the community. They're going to go to one of the tractor dealers and they're going to buy a little tractor. And that's going to be money that's then in the community. And that's what we need.
Madam Chairman, I knew, and I wasn't involved in that ordinance, but that it was set to reduce the number of farmettes except in the rural conservation area. I'm ambivalent about some of this, but I think Carla had a thought that is that you could change the rule but eliminate some of your density. If you really need to split a 198 acre farm, you could do it. But do we want to turn it into 7, 6, 20 acre farmettes? I'm not so sure. It's great for the market. It sells a lot. I take a little umbrage of people that say that too many people control the land here. All the land here has been bought free and clear, and people chose that. And there were willing buyers and willing sellers, and if people could buy more, good for them, as long as it stays in farmland, in my opinion. But whether we owe it to the community, I think it's great to have multiple uses, but maybe you handle that in the zoning districts, put more into that rural, what was the RCA character, or rural character, and allow for that. And those areas are usually closer to the villages and towns, and they allow for some of those uses, and we don't create farmettes everywhere. I think could be a happy medium in this, but that's my opinion.
Madam Chairman, I agree with Joe. I think we could try to modify it in certain ways, but to wholeheartedly to allow farms to be chopped up, and I literally mean that, chopped up, and then you bring housing development, even though it's only 6 lots, but on a 200-acre farm, you're still bringing in residents. If they were there really to farm would be one thing, but sometimes having left an area that we moved here from an area that thought they were doing the right thing, and they've turned it into large estates. They did not farm it, and you have these large parcels, and it totally destroyed the agriculture over a period of time. That the agriculture in that county is struggling to stay afloat. We have a wonderful area in this county, a large amount of prime soils, and I think we need to respect that gift that we have here, and we have to respect the farmers that are working the land and preserving the land by keeping it in farming. And if you start to let it infiltrate a little bit here, a little bit there, with no controls, and it can pop up wherever, you're going to have conflict. You're going to allow conflict to come into this county.
Well, I think you would get discussion on that's like saying that someone has a vineyard that they're not a farmer. If someone has a greenhouse and grows flowers or grows tomatoes, that they're not a farmer.
I did not say that,
Well,
Tom.
I didn't say you. I said it sounds like that.
No,
But
I'm
that's the
talking
way
about the
I
houses
take
that
it.
come in. When you start letting, the house will go along with it. Okay, if you had a vineyard, you had a small 50-acre, whatever, greenhouse development, that's one thing. But some of these parcels that are going to be cut off are not going to be affiliated with farming. They're just bringing in houses and people from wherever that don't respect farming.
Well, everything I've seen in King County is if they do have a 20-acre parcel, they're either someone's farming it, or they have a horse, or they have something that's related to agriculture. Now, I don't know if that's going to continue into the future. We don't know what's going to continue into the future, but we can't go backwards. I mean, we've got to continue to try to make our agriculture strong, and it may not be the strong that we have today. I mean, things change. I mean, when I came here in 1971, Kent County looks nothing today like it did then, and that's just the way it went. And we're not going back to the way it was in 1971. But you're seeing more and more people wanting to have a sustainable small acreage that they can grow, supplement income, whatever. I mean, it's not something I don't desire to do it. I don't want to have a vineyard or a greenhouse or something, but I don't see why we can't allow that. And when you start telling someone, okay, well, you can have to buy 100 acres, when you look at the cost of that, we eliminate a lot of young people, and I know we want to protect it for ourselves, but I just think we should open it up some.
Again, Joe's suggestion was to zone more a rural character area where it would allow for that, but not put it out where it's the 1 per 30.
Once again, I think we have to consider what's best for everybody in the county, personally, and give opportunity to more people. If you will look at the latest farm sales, the prices that properties are selling for now, I mean, you're talking $9, $10, $12, $14,000 per acre. Not everybody can afford that. And not everybody coming in, or young farmers that don't have a family or don't have the opportunity to inherit or move into a situation that want to be a part of it. I think we need to give a little more opportunity to more people around here. This is not something that I personally benefit from. This is not something, I think we have to look at the best of the whole community and not just a certain little group of people. And that's where I stand with it. I'm not saying we have to open it wide open, but we do need to modify that. And from my recollection, the 10% rule came in one day. All of a sudden, I went into the planning office and they said, you can't do that. I never had any idea it was a 10% rule until one day I went in there with something. And that was probably back, I don't know when it was. It was probably 10, 15, 18 years ago. And so, people don't even know what's happening, what they can and can't do with some of their properties. And that's a problem. But anyway, I'm sticking with what I said. I said that I think having your density at 1 to 30 and being able to get 6 lots off of whatever size your property is way more appealing than just being able to develop 10% of your farm. So that's, I don't know how else to say it.
I think we also have to need to recognize that not all the land is owned by farmers. And there are people that have bought land here for many reasons, investors, quality of life people. and they're fortunate to have some of the best farmers in the country tilling it. And most of those farmers would not want to see this. And I can name quite a few who rent a lot of land, sharecrop a lot of land, and this would change the dynamics because the farmettes would come out and they would effectively cut up their operations. I still say the ease is to leave the AZD alone and go with the rural character, increase the rural character. I'm not opposed to the small farms. I think it's great. I admire people that want to do the vineyard, shiitake mushrooms, the whole thing. That's wonderful. But don't give up what we've got. No one's got this prime farmland base in the East Coast like Kent County. And when you came here 71, it's only gotten better. This is the county people want to be in, and that's because we had good zoning all these years.
This is Bill Sutton again. I've been around a long time, and I made myself clear, I think, early on with this committee that they're not making any more of this wonderful farmland. People that can afford it are here, and have some of the best farmers, like Joe said, on the East Coast. So we need to do something that happened years back when the farmettes got real popular. Farmettes for 20 acres, they put a house on it, and then they found out you couldn't keep the grass mowed. So they got to get a couple of horses. And they can't do that at night and morning. It's too much work. So here's some farms out here cut up with 20-acre parcels that we do with big operators don't want to them. That's all I'm gonna say right now.
Okay, should we move on to number 3?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This item involves the discussion of how much landscaping is required. The various zoning districts have different standards for landscaping. Those landscaping standards are based on percentages of development, and they do vary from district to district. I think the concern raised was that there's a large amount of requirements in certain cases, and there's also the developer has the opportunity to choose the kind of landscaping they use, and there's a credit system. So depending on those choices, there may be a wide variety of plantings required. That's my understanding of the request. And I imagine some of these items may or may not require discussion, and I'm happy to move forward with other items. Hearing none. Item number 4, request consideration that non-conforming structures be made legal and conforming. I think the nature of this, as I understand it, in some cases, it's difficult to get mortgages for properties that may be legal but non-conforming, and there are ways of legalizing things so that they're no longer legal non-conforming. That would affect our non-conforming structures chapter and possibly non-conforming uses within that chapter. That would take some legal study to set that up. But again, the idea is there's two kinds of buildings. There's buildings that meet the code, and there's buildings that don't meet the code, but because of when they were constructed or other factors, they're considered legal even though they're non-conforming. That's the topic of this.
This is Pat. Can someone give me an example of what this is? I mean, is it because the building is old, an old structure, and what are the ramifications if it can remains non-conforming but legal?
Right. So there's some examples across the county that I think are sort of stand out. I'm looking at Carla. It's the welding operation that I drove by.
Well, there are both non-conforming uses such as residential structures on marine zone properties.
And then there are non-conforming structures, which means that some they were built prior to zoning, and now like the setbacks can't be met, or the lot size isn't large enough
to meet
to meet the minimum standards. And so
there
there are two different types of nonconformities, and I'm not exactly sure which one this is really trying to address, whether it's the uses or structures. Sometimes they're kind of one and the same. But
Correct.
This is Buck Nickerson. I have a pretty good example for you, Miss Pat. I deal with a lot of waterfront properties, and back prior to like 1985 or so, if you built a house, you could build the house 20, 30 feet from the water. And houses were built perfectly legal then. And by today's standards with the critical area laws, now there's a 100-foot setback. And you get into a situation where a lot of those houses that were built prior to critical area are now, you have termite damage, structural damage as far as the foundations are crumbling and all that. And the rule has it today for a waterfront house that's too close to the water that as long as you can keep the foundation, you can build back on top of it. And I actually had a customer who he got a permit to rebuild on the structure. They pulled the material back and the foundation was failing. And he wasn't allowed to build that porch back on his house because it was considered non-conforming, which I really didn't think that was fair because that porch had been there for 20 or 30 years, something like that. So that's kind of my 2 cents worth, I guess.
Thank you.
Well, I do think also, again, there's a difference between use and structure. In our code, it kind of says that we want to reuse existing buildings is encouraged, but yet if they sit idle for 2 years, you can't use them. Well, I don't know how that works. And we have, and I don't, want to get into, but we have them all over this county where, even in our agricultural community, where buildings have been empty, and now they're being used, but in all, and I don't know if they got a variance or what they did, but if they just did it, as long as no one says anything, that seems to be the way things work. If no one says anything, it's all right. But if someone says something, then you're in trouble. There's one right near you that, it by rights violates this rule. I don't see where if the building, if it was lawful when it was built, which I'm assuming they were, that why we can't use them today for a purpose. Just because they're empty for 2 years. There's also in there any lawful use before April 12th, 1988. You can continue to use it unless it's been abandoned for more than 1 year. So we have a 2 year, we have a 1 year. But see, there's where you're getting into use and structure. And somewhere that needs to be clarified. I have no problem if someone has an old barn and they want to, and say they milk cows in it in 1930, the barn's still there and it's still functional. If they want to raise, petition a part of it off and raise pigs in it or raise chickens in it, laying hens to sell at the farmer's market, why shouldn't they be allowed to do it without violating our zoning code? I think it makes agriculture
This is
strong.
Sam Shoge. I have a question / comment about this. I mean, wouldn't this be considered grandfathering in something that isn't conforming? I certainly don't think it's fair to penalize a landowner who, at one time or another, may have purchased a property or purchased a building for an intended use that was legal whenever it was that that transaction was made, only for them to be penalized with added construction costs or added project engineering costs to bring something um, up to date whenever the rules change. Um, so, do we have a grandfather clause in our code? Is this an example of grandfathering? Is there a difference? Can somebody enlighten me on the two?
Hey, Sam, this is Bill Mackey. And the provisions we're discussing, non-conforming uses and structures, would be informally referred to as grandfathering clauses. So you're in the right spot. And essentially, what President Mason mentioned is that there's a 2-year limit for most uses. So if a use is no longer permitted and that use is not conducted and 2 years passes, then it cannot be conducted again.
Got it.
So there's a limit to the grandfathering.
And if somebody comes in after 2 years, let's say they want to continue the exact same thing and make no changes, would we still then require them to bring that building up to current day code? Or could we potentially grant them an extension to that grandfather clause as long as they're utilizing the space the same way that it was utilized previously?
So the structure and what's legal is separate from the use made of the structure. So our non-conforming provisions are pretty complicated, and there's a lot of exceptions and different sets of standards. But in general, if a use is no longer permitted in that zoning district and it's not conducted on a property for a certain amount of time, then it's done. And in general, when you change uses in a building, you do have to bring it up to current code.
Right.
Things like ADA, et cetera, that supersede our zoning code. So those things are, beyond us. That's the general lay of the land.
What about a sale? Could somebody sell the property as long as it's within that 2-year time frame and the use is still permitted? Will that grandfather clause, if you will that be able to transfer in the sale of a property as long as it's within that 2-year window?
Right. So it is about the use and not the user. It doesn't matter who's doing it. So yes, that ownership does not affect the use.
Okay, thank you.
Let me just go back a little bit, and I'm specifically speaking of agriculture here. Some of the agricultural, you could never get, like if our setbacks are say 600 feet and this building is 100 feet off the road, you can never get it to 600 feet. So right there they've lost. And then the other thing is, if you have a family and say the parents farmed and they get older and say they quit whatever they were using this building for, and maybe 10 years later the son or the grandson or someone wanted to, well, I want to use this building for another animal use, they can't do it either. And it just stops progress, and it stops agriculture. Let the landowners and and I'm speaking here particularly of agriculture. You get into a whole different issue when you come to say if it's an office building or something else, because there could be disability things you have to meet and all that, and that's something else. But I don't think we should be limiting buildings in our agricultural zone districts to, if they don't meet your setbacks and all that, or if they haven't grown or were not used for what they were originally intended for, that they can't be used for another agricultural use. Because none of us know what's going to happen in the future with, like, even in families or I think we need to encourage young people. The older I get, the more I realize we've got to encourage young people to get into agriculture, or we're going to end up all being corporate farms, and I don't know that that's necessarily the best for a community.
Tom,
This is Carla, and I'm going to throw in that that's where we make a distinction between use and structure. So if somebody has a farm and the building doesn't meet the setbacks, but the use is permitted, then they can apply for a variance to deal with the setback issue and potentially still use that building as is permitted. So there are some remedies in the land use ordinance to address issues with structures as opposed to the issues with uses.
Use, yeah. I mean, I get concerned a little bit that we're all coming into our Planning and Zoning Commission and asking for a variance or special permission or this type of thing, which takes up the time of the Planning Commission, and which I don't really know that that's necessary. Have it in our code that if, I don't care if no one's raised something, whatever, in that building for 2 years, that they could start raising whatever. I mean, I just think it would make it simpler.
Madam Chair, we've come to that part of our meeting where we generally take a break, and I wanted to suggest that before we move on.
Okay. So we'll come back in 15 minutes. Be 7:23. So see you then.
And just as I announced last time, we're not going to turn off the recording. We're not going to turn off the YouTube because we want to make sure it stays on. So if you're in this room is mic'd, so your conversations will most likely be picked up. So thank you.
I couldn't understand what he was saying.
It's something this important. It's a shame we have to do it like this, but that's what it is. Maybe more people get these vaccines or something. Maybe we can find a larger place or whatever, so people can come and voice their opinions.
Two rooms.
My thinking was if we wouldn't use, we have it set up for those vaccines right now, but out there at that community center, like, that's a big enough area, in case you could put everybody in there and spread them apart further than they are here. And everybody been in the same room.
Well, I think, isn't the next meeting supposed to be a public forum? Which I think the plan was to have it somewhere else. I'm not sure on that, but I think the next one's a public, I think.
Forum, if you got the county center, you got the high school,
Right.
you got some areas.
Yeah, the only thing I don't know is how, does it have the capabilities of all of these bars?
How many people in the room here have been vaccinated? All, pretty much all of us.
Yeah, I think all of us.
Exactly, so why the hell are we doing this? If we're all vaccinated? You know?
Well,
You could be sitting right next to each other in every one of these chairs. If you're vaccinated, you don't have to worry.
Either that or they lied to us.
Why the hell are we doing this? I mean, this,
well,
you know, 6 months ago, this was it. That's not the case now. Why don't you change the rules to adapt to what's really going on? I guess it comes down to who's got control of that rule.
Well, we, the commissioners, sat up there every week and we don't wear masks. I mean, we're all,
It's just ridiculous because this process is absolutely inadequate for anybody to really understand and communicate. And, you know, I bet that half the people in this room, if not more, are vaccinated. I mean, all of us are.
but there's still some people, and for whatever reason, that they don't want to meet yet.
Well, if they don't want to be vaccinated, that's up to them.
Right.
But they can sit in a separate room and be separated.
I agree with that.
Vaccinated, there's no hazard of getting this disease
Right.
of any significance. And it's ridiculous to keep these same rules when there's no reason for it anymore. You can literally go for people that haven't been vaccinated, they could wear the mask. It's really, the person wearing the mask is the one projecting. I mean, they've all got to decide for themselves how much risk they want to take.
maybe we could have Bill check with everybody on this thing and find out how many's been vaccinated and the ones that aren't, let them.
And again, they're vaccinating, you know, every week, so I
Well-
expect it's gonna keep going up pretty quickly.
What I can understand from, there are some people that they enjoy doing it this way. Some people in the task force, they enjoy doing it this way for whatever reason. And I'm not, and that's not for me to decide why they want to do it that way. I mean, some people are more technologically savvy that maybe they make it work better than I would.
Problem you got is you got 3 different microphones going on. You got your own personal one, you got this one or wherever, but you mentioned 2, I'm hearing 3, that's why you see me up here, I'm not ready to throw the headset away.
Yeah,
I
you
can
all.
hear 3 people when I'm wearing the headset. You know,
I probably don't hear as good as a lot of people do, but I have trouble because I hear it twice and
yeah, when you hear it twice, you
it's
can't, when you say
just
it, you're not
confusing.
wrong.
Well, I hear it better with the microphone than I do otherwise.
Well, you've got a little different set, a little different headset.
Well-
You're blocking out, you know, different than
Yeah.
what I've got.
Fair wage
Of course,
should be paid.
the first headset,
I think
didn't
Dustin.
hear anything.
Yeah, that's,
How do you make it? I mean, I thought you told me you got this today.
yeah, they got dust. All we're doing is getting feedback.
Oh, he enjoyed it. He sold it.
I don't want to say feedback.
Oh, good.
but
They
yeah.
sold something.
By the time Carla talks, we can hear Carla talking, and then when she speaks into the microphone, it goes out around the system, and comes back out again.
Yeah.
You know, there's a delay.
I didn't know he got the seat back.
What you're going through is, you know, you gotta put yourself in a position, because people used to sing the national anthem in football stadiums. You know, they're singing, and then, you know, half a second later, it's coming back
coming
over the
back.
PA system.
Yeah.
I've spoken in some venues like that, it's wild, you've got to concentrate on what you're saying, but you can't understand.
Hopefully we'll get to some kind of, where it'll be more reasonable, more normal.
Weather gets a little better, we can hold it outside.
Arrow inside, there you go.
We're talking about Mars, let's go hold it. You know, get a little hands
Does
up.
that mean that we're done with this 10% rule?
Well, the idea is that you guys introduce topics, discuss the topics, everybody gets to give their opinion, and later in the process, you'll opportunity to make that.
Okay, that's great.
Right, exactly.
Good, okay, that's because I'm
his background from the interior.
You remember, in Florida, there was a lady that worked at 4-H TJ Brown. It's her husband, and he works for probation and parole.
Okay.
You know, he's an African American.
That's
Keep thinking of training her house.
after World War II.
Plug it in.
The worst part is I say someone like, say, something you haven't seen often, like you say, I know them. It's not like someone you just met.
It's on my phone number, I'm trying to remember that.
Okay, I got vaccinated and I'm driving crazy, wake up at night.
What we call you 3 o'clock?
Got up at 4:30 again.
Originally from you, and I was in Ohio, that's a good place to be from. Correct. I was about 100 miles north of New York City. And believe it or not, the town I grew up in, that part of the county, it's almost identical to this side. Well, you got St. Lawrence? St. Lawrence, yes. We stay right in St. Lawrence. And Clark's, I went to Clark's next year. Listen, I can't remember, what was that first name of the fellow we pointed to the planning board yesterday? It's Brown's, his last name. What's his first name? I can't.
Is it,
It starts with a T.
then it's Tim or Tom.
Neither one of those.
Bill would probably know.
Bill.
Yeah. Yeah, when we,
You should remember that.
I haven't seen
Well,
it.
you
I
weren't
haven't
there.
figured
You
I
probably
wasn't
haven't
there.
seen it.
Yeah.
You weren't there.
I'm not that young.
It's all relative.
It's all relative. See, when I was in school up there, I had very nice nurses. And that was always interesting. I bet it was. Think of his wife's first name.
Let me go ask.
I can't think of.
I'll remember that now. I have a cousin named Tyler.
That was the last thing I remember. I remember that. Yeah, I got that one.
It's amazing how your mind
And that's part of the problem. I
You're just joining us. We were taking a 15-minute break, so we'll get started in another minute or two.
Did you have me to?
I think everyone. Everyone should be back now. If you can put yourself on mute if you're not speaking. And if you're just joining us, we're up to number 5 on the list of proposed text changes. And I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Mackey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a suggestion before we start, if possible. We might want to watch our clocks, and at about 7:45, perhaps table the discussion and continue it after the public forum at our next meeting. And that'll give the public that are present tonight the opportunity to speak, and we can close on some business, and then we can talk about schedule the next meeting. So the next item on our agenda is reviewing the concept of resetting the clock on the number of building sites and perhaps setting a density of 1 unit per 30 acres, regardless of what's been subdivided previously. I can attempt to explain this a little bit, but I'm sure Ms. Garber can explain it better than me. There's a system in Kent County where when you subdivide properties, the portions of the property already previously subdivided up to a certain year count as a number of lots. So, and there's a history to that. And the proposal is, do we want to consider restarting the clock, change the density to be perhaps more restrictive, but allowing folks to move forward with a little different scenario? And in order to address this, staff recognizes that some research is going to have to be done, some scenarioing to see what those kind of outcomes might be. That kind of scenario takes some time, and with GIS it won't be perfect, but we can get a fairly good estimate across the county of what the order of magnitude of change may or may not be with that sort of scenario. And I'd certainly like to give Ms. Garber an opportunity to talk about this if she would like to, and then we can open up to the floor.
Thank you. So what this is referring to is that we count density from August 1st, 1989. And this would just be saying that we'll reset that date. There's a different date that we use for determining minor or major subdivision, and that's 1969. And I'm not sure that we'd be looking to change that, but I guess we could. This was dealing strictly with resetting the density clock.
Carla, this is Buck Nickerson. Is it? I was under the impression that this was a state regulation that the state imposed, that any once a county developed its zoning, that or zoning regulation, that all the density started at that point. I work in Cecil, Kent, and Queen Anne's, and it seems to be pretty a consistent thing throughout. That, like I said, the density starts from a date predetermined by the zoning ordinance. Are you aware of anything like that?
Buck, I agree. That's what I was always told, that those dates were state mandated.
Well, then it sounds like we need to do some legal research to see how those dates are established and if they can be changed.
We can certainly look into that. Well, with that question pending in the air, we can probably move on to the next item.
Good. Hold on a sec. Didn't Carla mention something earlier on in an earlier meeting that Kent County was exempt from some of that? One of 2 counties in the state. Didn't it have to do with that? With how many lots? Shoot, I can't really remember, but it seems to me that yes.
That is a exemption on the prohibition of major subdivisions in Tier 4 areas, and that has to do with the septic tier law that was passed in 2012, which prohibits major subdivisions in Tier 4 areas, which are your ag areas, and we have an exemption to that.
Okay, all right, yeah, then I'm sorry, I was confused. Very good. Proceed.
Thank you. Madam Chair, the next issue is about the definition of farms. Kent County currently limits farms to 20 acres or greater, and there's been some conversation, and I've certainly heard this conversation since I started here by members of the public, many folks, that resetting that size and allowing folks to operate smaller farms is certainly a discussion that's been ongoing on for some time. And as the notations say, there might be two definitions in the code that might need to be changed in order to change that standard if so desired.
And this standard might also involve assessment regulations on how farms are taxed and what size and how they qualify. I think we took the easy road and said 20 acres is sort of that minimum size. I know that if you want less than 20 acres to qualify as a farm for assessment purposes, you have to meet certain income requirements. And so we just, I think, just went with, like I said, the easy route, and it may be time to reevaluate that.
If I could comment on this. When you drive around King County, there's an awful lot, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this, where the people have a few acres. It might even be like 2 acres, 3 acres, 4 acres, and they at this current time have an agricultural enterprise, whether it's an animal or something else that they are participating in, and most of it's because they want to get back to their earth, they want to get back to their rural heritage and whatever. But I don't see any. I mean, essentially they're illegal. We allow them because we don't go around. We're not a police force. Our county's not a police force. We don't have the personnel, and I don't think we should do that anyway. But that person essentially is fine until someone complains, and then it's an issue. But why not just make them? I mean, I could take you. I mean, we wouldn't have to drive far to. There's just place after place where, they may have an animal in the backyard. They may have. I can think of one place it's probably about 3 acres, and they have goats on one side of the house and some steers on the other side of the house. Another one has a steer in his backyard. I don't know how many acres he has, 3 or 4. There's another one that has, and a lot of these people they're going to farmers markets. Maybe they have chickens and they take their eggs to the farmers market somewhere. They might even have bees and they have honey. I don't see why we wouldn't want to encourage that if they so desire in our agriculturally zoned areas. Now here again, we don't want to allow that in a housing development like in Kennedyville Village or Coventry or Orchard Hill or any of those kind of places. But I think it would be an attribute to our county to make it legal. I might also comment too, and this goes back to, this is kind of intertwined with that allowing the 10% rule where a person has smaller acreage. So, I think we've got to become more flexible.
On that topic, that on number 6, it's on you said for personal use on a home site in an area that's zoned for agriculture. A home site can be rather small, 2 acres, let's say, 1 acre, in order to have a septic system. are we going to restrict what they can do there? For example, do they have chickens and goats and sheep all on 2 acres or do we say you can have this or this, but not have a whole lot of the old farmer looking type place? I don't know, because if it's in an area that's a home site, that means there might be other homes nearby, and then their place is not kept up to the standards of other homeowners would prefer. So, I mean, I'm not against people growing things in their backyard for the farmer's market, but certainly we might have to have some kind of guidance or restrictions or something of that nature, not just say, go do what you want.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I would agree with that. And we already have that in a sense. If someone doesn't mow their yard and it grows up into weeds, then I believe someone complains. And here again, you get back to the complaint thing. If someone complains, and Carla, Bill, you can correct me, our code enforcement officer would approach them and try to, make them, or they could be fined. As far as saying what we want to limit somebody to, hopefully, I mean, if they don't use good management practices, and that gets into another whole thing, where it wouldn't be any different if you had, I mean, you can have bad management practices with one animal as well as you could 500 animals. So the same sequence would follow there, I would hope.
I would say that this is something we do need to look at because we actually do allow horses. A private stable, I think you need a minimum of 2 acres and you have to have at least 1 acre per horse, and you're limited, I think, to 4 before it becomes a special exception. So I guess you have to look, is a horse any different than having a couple of goats or somebody who wants to have a steer? So I think that in today's kind of age where people want to have these farmettes and they do want to live more sustainably, it's something we should look at.
Moving on to the next item. Next item talks about reviewing the setbacks along roadways so the county and state utilities don't have to maintain vegetation planted along those rights of way. And in general, the county requires a 50-foot right of way. Often that's comprised of pavement and stormwater measures like swales. And right of ways are under specific design standards in most of the zoning districts, and there's an example given. And certainly we could look at narrower roads. I know there's a complete streets is another way of looking at roadways. So there's different ways that we could look at our roadways as opposed to just a standard nominal width.
This might also be related to people who plant within this right-of-way to create a hedge along their property. I think Mr. Mason pointed out a stretch along Bayshore Road, which I happened to notice the other day, and realized that both the power company and probably the county are having to trim trees because somebody planted too close to the edge of their property. I'm not sure how we address that, but it is an issue.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we were trying to look at is, I know what the landowner's doing, and I respect that. They're trying to keep as much tillable ground as they can. So they plant it as close to the road as they can, and that, I understand that. But somewhere it needs to be set back to the point where the county or the state or the electric company doesn't have to come along and then mow that for them. Every year, Kent County mows Chicken Road because they've got the bushes right on the road, and if you didn't mow them, cars would be running into them. And there wasn't any reason when it was done it couldn't have been put whatever kind of bush they're planting, if it's going to spread out X number of feet to where planted far enough in their field so that when it's mature, it's still in their field, but they might have lost another acre or 2 acres or whatever. But that's a choice you make if you want to have this hedge, because I don't believe the landowners or the taxpayers in the county or the state should have to maintain this for people.
Madam Chair. Our next item is to consider review allowing data processing centers on land in AZD at 0.5% of the total land area, or about 630 acres, with the idea that landowners could decide if they wanted to look at this option. This scenario would require the addition of data processing centers in AZD. There was recent legislation last year where that provision was removed. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I don't think data centers are appropriate in our land use ordinance in the AZD. They're clearly not an ag use. The county has not done enough research on what they would be like in size, scale, their noise, water use. And right now, I don't think we have any demand for. We have land zoned for these that has not, unless I've missed it, they've not been built on. I mean, there's land available for data centers by right in the county now, and if that runs out, that's maybe a zoning issue to look at zoning more for industrial or employment center. But I adamantly oppose this as a use in the AZD. It is not compatible with normal farming operations.
Well, let me comment to this, and I totally disagree with that, unless in 1970 it wasn't. But let me tell you, if you didn't have a data center today, most of your farmers in King County would be out of business, because they're precision planters, they're auto steer, everything is ran from a data center. And that is part of agriculture today. And to think it's not, we have our heads set in the sand. And I think this provision is what we're trying to do is we're going to limit it to 630 acres, which is a half of 1% of our ag land. That's not a preserved land, but the land that's available. Because what it does then, and no, we don't have anyone at this point that I know of that's said they want to build a data center in King County. But what it does, I know Jamie has talked to some people, but when they come, okay, where can we build these? And well, here, and here. And they say, well, we're not interested because it's not even enough ground enough to look at. If we could say, well, there's a half of 1%, 630 acres of our most number of acres of land zoned that you can look at, I think they would have more interest. And that doesn't mean, hey, no one's going to force the landowner to sell it. I mean, let the landowner decide. If he wants to chop 5 acres off here and build it to a data center that's going to help King County, going to help agriculture, I think it's, I don't see how that's bad. I mean, a landowner does not have to sell it. I mean, if we can make agriculture profitable enough, the best way to preserve farmland is to make the industry profitable. No one would sell their farmland. A true farmer is not going to sell their farmland if they can make a living from it. And I don't think for 630 acres is destroying our agriculture.
Well, I'll let other people talk, but I completely disagree. Data centers are necessary, and they're necessary where they're allowed. And they don't need to be in ag land. If they were all in ag land, farmland. It has nothing to do. Do we want chemical plants? Do we want tire factories? You can make that red herring argument about what agriculture is. The data center is a use. Is a use that can be put anywhere, but doesn't have to be an ag land, and we have the land. Even when everyone says we don't have the land, it's not right. Why haven't we had an application? Why haven't we had one come in for the industrial land? So why do we have to offer any more when no one's asked to do anything? I mean, we seem to have this effort to put it in the less expensive land. There's Brambles is doing stuff up in the industrial land, all good stuff. They paid a lot of money for that land. Why wouldn't they? They would love to sell it. They don't want to go into ag land. When you say it doesn't bother other people, if it's next to you, it does. The other landowners have rights too next to you.
Well,
because they bought an ag land and it's not an ag use.
I just, like I said, and we'll agree to disagree, it is an ag use. There's no question about that. I can find you plenty of data on Ocean Breeze cranberry people that grow all their irrigation, everything they will tell you is ran through a data center.
That I understand.
And I don't know why we want to not encourage things that are agriculture. And that's what that does. And it's going to be the landowner's choice. It's a personal choice. That a landowner does not have to sell his land for a data center, but give him a choice. We all make choices.
The neighbor doesn't get a choice. That he doesn't want a data center next to him.
If he's in we have a right to farm law in Kane County.
It's got to be an ag use.
This is an ag use. That's where we hung up on whether it's an ag use or not.
I'm not hung up on that at all.
Well, I'm not hung up on it either because I think it is. But this is just a matter of discussion. And
why don't we see if we build some in the industrial where they're allowed by right, and see if there's such a demand, we need to rezone land for that. That would be a more appropriate way. And that would not impact current landowners who don't want a data center next to them.
We're trying to be proactive rather than reactive.
Who's we?
The Kent County.
I see that Sam's come off microphone. So do we want to let Sam make a comment? And then,
sorry. Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, we're at 7:45, so we do need to turn to the public.
Thank
Sam,
you.
please.
Go ahead.
I appreciate it. Whereas I am inclined to agree with Commissioner Mason's sentiments on, allowing flexibility to build these data centers on land that's zoned AZD. I think saying that it is considered agriculture may be a stretch. However, it is certainly plays a large role in how contemporary agriculture is done today and how a lot of just business in general is done. But the way that I see it, having a restriction in place already and capping that at 630 acres, I think that is coming into this overall conversation with major concessions already. So finding some type of way that we can reach some type of agreement, because what it sounds like is that the county commissioners, the county economic development, have really identified data centers as being integral to the county's overall future with regards to economic development. And Joe, to your point, we haven't quite done any studies yet in terms of, what's the overall size of these data centers that we could potentially attract to this community. But, one thing that I will say, especially with an economic development background, is that sometimes, projects cap out and are limited and constrained pretty quickly when they're doing their overall engineering with just the overall size of the land that they're working with. So having that additional flexibility to potentially, grow that project into land that may be zone AZD that's next to that industrial land where it's permitted. I think in that context, something like this would give a future developer a lot of flexibility and would give the county a pretty significant tool to recruit some of these data centers in the future. But the likelihood of a data center going into an area that's zoned AZD, that's just, in the middle of the county, away from major types of infrastructure, power lines, roads, et cetera, I think the overall likelihood of that is incredibly low. But if we have AZD land that's next to industrial land, and we can give a future developer the opportunity to actually grow that project right next to that land that's already zoned appropriately, I think we definitely need to take advantage of it. 630 acres, having that cap in place already, I think is a really good idea. We're coming to the table with a lot of concessions already. But I agree to your point, Joe. It's a stretch to say that it is agriculture, but to Commissioner Mason's point, we need flexibility, and I would really like to see that flexibility kind of built into this overall code. That's my comment. Thank you.
Tom, this is Bill Sutton again. We were informed at one of our planning commission meetings one day about a year ago that these things were extremely noisy, these units. And so that's one reason why we sort of had a bad taste about them from the get-go. I'm not saying I can't weed that out, but then when you mentioned it would take up as much as 650 acres of tillable soil, a lot of farmers would like to have it 630, 40, 50 acres to till. So I think you better leave the ag land alone.
Sam, thank you for your comments. If the need, I don't know how the 630 came up, but if that's necessary, we're going through a comprehensive rezoning. Why not keep the use where it's allowed, not change the AZD district, but rezone those acres of landowners that want it near in our current industrial or employment center zones? It would serve the same thing and not allow it to end up in an inappropriate area. Thank you.
All right, we're at 7:50, so I think we should open the floor for public comment. Just a few parameters here. We ask that you comment on topics that we've discussed this evening. If you can limit your comments to 3 minutes, that would be helpful. And please speak directly into the microphone for the recording. So any comments from the public?
Can you hear me?
Someone.
Yeah, this is Bill Crowd, and I'll try to go through them real quick. As far as the number one that was stated on there in the ag district, you look at the other counties that have less restrictive setbacks than Kent County has, you'll notice that while they're all amending their zoning ordinances, they are looking at the Kent County zoning ordinance to set those numbers at. They realize that the setbacks that we're using are appropriate setbacks. And if you go down and you check the market values of the properties down in the lower counties and on the Eastern Shore, you'll find that some of these poultry houses have just driven the land values for houses around there right in the ground. Then on number two with the 10% rule, when you start cutting these farms up into lots that don't really produce agricultural products, you're going to start losing your ag support industries. And once you lose those ag support industries, you're going to lose your agriculture. You see that on the Western Shore, that the farming operations started getting eaten up by developments. Then your farm support industries left, and with the guys that wanted to farm, they had to sell those, move over here and buy farms and go back into business. Down on number 5 to reset the allowable buildable sites up to 1 unit per 30 acres. I think, like it's been stated, I think you'll find that the Maryland Code says 1969 is the date. Everything after that counts. With the agricultural operations on number 6, that can be handled through special exceptions. That way, if the neighbors have a problem with it, restrictions can be put on. It's the same as what we used to call conditional uses. They put conditions on them, they have to meet them. If they don't meet them, they lose that use. And then down on number 8 with the data centers. Look, we're approving areas for data centers. It was given an unfavorable recommendation from the Planning Commission, except in a couple zoning districts. It went before the county commissioners. All 3 commissioners admitted that they had never seen a data center. A couple of them admitted they didn't even know what a data center was and approved them. Let's go out and take a look at these things before we start saying they can be anywhere. I agree with Mr. Hickman. You put one in the ag district alongside of a guy that's got a dairy farm, and those machines are running all night long like they say they do, and the noise generated and affects his dairy herd. I think he'd have a problem with that. We've got them in zones that are used, that are allowed, use them. And like Joe said, if you want it in more areas, rezone the areas for that. Find out who wants one. Put them out there. I don't see anybody lining up to put them out there. And if you think that using a cell phone makes a data center an agricultural use, my gosh, then we're going to allow steel mills, rubber plants, everything else. That's a red herring as far as I'm concerned. I'm signing off now.
Thank you, Bill. Other comments from the public?
Hi, this is Judy Gifford. Can you?
We can hear you.
Oh, thank you. I just have some general concerns that a lot of these comments are based on anecdotes, like a farmer has a goat or somebody wants some chickens. And it's very confusing to understand what the real need for the change is without having more information and data and really some concrete reasons instead of just these anecdotes that somebody might want to have a small farm. I mean, it's just crazy to make a decision based on stories. Thank you.
You.
Oh, my.
Madam Chair, this is Bill Mackey. We have some folks in the room who would like to give testimony as well.
Okay, I see someone there trying to speak, but
Hey Kim, this is Janet Christensen
hi,
Lewis
Janet. Yes,
from Millington, Maryland. I just have a few comments. Many of these things that are being discussed tonight, I don't see as major controversy, but of course, most of the ones that have come up in the first half of this have all kinds of problems attached to them. And I would say that property owners, when you have property, it comes with certain rights. However, as Oliver Wendell Holmes was quoted as saying, "Your liberty to swing your fists ends just where my nose begins." And zoning is the boundary line between that fist and the nose. Zoning regulations are in place to ensure land is developed in a way that protects the rights of all members of the community and property owners in the community, and not just an individual. In this way, it helps to reduce conflict and uphold community standards. The community standards are enumerated in the comprehensive plan, and therefore the zoning code enacted in Kent County are bound by Maryland statute to uphold those standards that have been expressed in that document. The comprehensive plan is totally related to what's going on here. I don't think that that has been discussed very much, but it isn't just what people think we should be doing with the land. It has to go back to what the community has said they want to see the land used for. And one of the major parts of the comprehensive plan is that agriculture in Kent County is considered the best use of our land. It's one of the first principles. And that we want to, one of the other principles of the comprehensive plan is that we want to do our development in an environmentally sound way by putting it close to villages and towns that already have water and sewer. some of these, particularly
Yeah.
the 10% rule
Uh-huh.
or the um, or doing the reset or dividing properties up into 20-acre parcels out into the agricultural,
Build it on the
that
floor?
is so opposed to what the comprehensive plan says about how we should do development. Smart growth came
Okay, taking a minute.
into Maryland in
What are you looking for?
1990. And
Yeah, I'm just gonna wait till I'm just gonna wait a minute.
hey, somebody needs to mute their phone. Yes, I'm sorry. Okay. Um, so many of these things, particularly that the 10% rule, I was just sitting there thinking that, somebody with a 5-acre farm, I mean, a 500-acre farm sitting out on the prime land, which is what we want to save, divides it up into 20-acre lots. Some of that may put in vineyards, but the majority of it is going to be people that are wealthy that want to build a house on 20 acres and put up a fence and mow their lawn. And I can guarantee you that that property will be more expensive in the long run than buying a farm. When Frank and I moved here, we looked at property. We didn't want a farm. We wanted a small piece of property. Well, all the property that we were looking at that was like 20, 30 acres would have cost us as much as we ended up paying for the farm. By the time you get it subdivided and that land is sitting there, there's costs involved in that. So some small, and it's a red herring to say that small farmers are going to come in and buy 20-acre parcels out in the countryside. The people that are doing small farming can barely afford 2 acres. So if you want to do something in your character zone, make it easier for people to have 2-acre plots and grow vegetables. Make it less expensive for that to happen. And in terms of data centers, Tom, you couldn't be more wrong about that being an agricultural use. I am so sorry to tell you that. First of all, there was a report that was done last year that looked at all of the uses of which industries were using data. Farming was the last one on the list, as you can well imagine. Tech, banking, hospitals, all kinds of other people are using data centers. And by the way, every single person that has a computer in their house is a data center because their computer stores data. Um, and, and do we have 650 acres in the industrial zone that could be made into a data center? I suspect we probably do, although that number has not been put forward at this particular point in time. So I just think that as you go through these, I think the task force and the planning commission and the commissioners need to realize that you can't just go willy-nilly and put in whatever you want. You have to consult with the comprehensive zone, comprehensive plan, and you have to take into account what impact whatever it is you're planning on doing is going to have on the next door neighbor's land. Thank you.
Can I speak? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, this Olin Davis up in Sassafras. Is there a brief definition for a data center? I mean, we're talking about something that is more than a cell tower, correct?
Yeah.
Does anybody really know?
Harla, I don't know if you have a definition.
Well, I mean, bottom line, okay, agriculture, we use data, hourly, whether we're running tractors, combines, or I'm looking at 4 computers in an office right now. I don't know the true definition of what's going to go on or the actual size of the facility that a data center is. But agriculture, at least on the level of what we see in this area, thrives on it. So um, just just hitting a couple other points here. I agree. I think it was with Janet in regards to the the trying to fit small farms or the farmette practices, whether it's for farm markets or whatever, into our what you call it, the ag. Oh, what was your word you had for that zoning? But it was basically it wasn't an AZB, agricultural character type zoning. Um, it seems to me to be the best place to have that kind of smaller scale ag. Um, it's and I think we've all seen the areas that where the farmettes, 20, 30 acre farmettes. Um, it's just difficult for them to be producing any kind of a agricultural production, whether it's for the farm markets or whatever. It's most of the time I think it's a dream people have, and then they realize that, as somebody was saying, there's really very limited money in it. Few people do make it, but a lot don't. Well, last point I just want to comment on was the setback for ag structures. I mean, we had to live up here with a 600-foot setback for poultry houses. I think 300 feet is a great spot to compromise on. And 250 maybe, but no closer than that. But 600 feet is just such overkill. It took us 85 acres to put what we put up here for poultry houses, to be able to get those kind of setbacks. I mean, the Kent County is supposed to be an ag-friendly county, and this is a major part of agriculture. It worries me some because ag is still even out here. Ag is a bit of a minority, and a lot of times you'll get people that won't, in the ag community, they won't step up and speak up for themselves, and they end up, more and more people like the big wide open fields and whatnot. But as far as actually, when you come down to whether it's dairy or poultry or whatever, they're the things that drive the grain markets and make this other business out here of farming such an attractive landscape, rolling fields of corn and whatnot. I think we've got to have a little more consideration for the industry and agriculture that requires some building, and a 600-foot setback I just think is just not practical. So I guess that's all I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Other comments? Public? Okay, hearing none. Bill, I'd like to ask, are we going to move on with the rest of the agenda or adjourn the meeting?
Madam Chair, I think at this point we should probably schedule the items that haven't been addressed for our next meeting.
Okay, that's fine. So if we are all in favor of adjourning the meeting, we can table the remaining items till our next meeting, which should be in about all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone not in favor? I think the meeting is adjourned, and thank you all very much for a great discussion.